My phone rang at 3:04 a.m., and I answered it because I recognized the number. Not because I was awake. I was not awake. I answered the way you answer something that has been ringing inside a dream for long enough that your hand moves before your brain does. Pulled the phone to my ear, said nothing, and heard Daniel Voss say, very quietly, "Don't tell anyone you're coming to my house right now." Then the line went dead. I sat up in the dark and held the phone and waited for my brain to catch up to what my hand had already done. Daniel Voss was my direct manager at Callaway Strategic Partners. He was 44, precise, not someone who called at 3 a.m., not someone who spoke quietly about anything. He had a voice built for conference rooms, and he used it accordingly. Clear, even, engineered to take up exactly the right amount of space and no more. The voice on the phone had been none of those things. It had been low and fast, and it had told me not to tell anyone. I got dressed in the dark and drove to his house. Let me tell you who Daniel Voss was before I tell you what I found. He had hired me 18 months earlier as a junior strategy consultant, which at Callaway meant you were one of 6 people in a room with him at any given time, close enough to watch how he worked, and far enough away that he didn't have to think about you. He was good at the job in the particular way that frightening people are good at things. Not loudly, not performatively, but with a kind of quiet exactness that made you recalibrate your own standards just by proximity. He didn't manage through praise. He managed through the precise, surgical removal of anything imprecise. And if you were on his team, you either learned to be more exact or you found a different team. I had learned to be more exact. I want to say that clearly because what happened next has a way of flattening who people were before it. And I don't want Daniel Voss to be flattened. He was difficult in the specific way that demanding people are difficult. And he was also. In the 18 months I worked beside him, fair, he gave credit where it was due. He remembered what you said in rooms where it would have been easy to forget. He once held a client meeting 7 minutes past its scheduled end specifically to make sure my analysis got a hearing it deserved, in front of people who would not have sought it out on their own. I had driven to his house at 3 a.m. because I trusted the person who had hired me. I want to be honest about that, because I also didn't know yet what I was driving toward. His house was a 30-minute drive from mine, which at 3 a.m. on a Wednesday becomes 22. All the lights were on. He opened the door before I knocked. He must have been watching, and looked at me for a moment with an expression I had never seen from him, which was something adjacent to relief. He said, "Come in," and stepped back, and I walked into his house and immediately understood why every light was on. The living room looked like someone had searched it. Not violently, nothing was broken, but every drawer of the credenza along the far wall was open. There were files on the coffee table, loose and out of their folders. His laptop was open on the kitchen counter, and there were 3 separate USB drives lined up next to it. I said, "What happened?" He said, "Sit down. I need to tell you something, and I need to tell it to you in a specific order, because the order matters." I sat down. "Callaway is going to announce layoffs on Friday," he said. 40% of the strategy division. That's 14 people. The list was finalized last week. I said nothing. I waited for the order to matter. "Your name is not on the list," he said. "Mine is." I looked at him. "I found out 4 hours ago," he said. "My access to the internal project management system was quietly downgraded tonight. I only noticed because I was working late on the Harrington account, and a file I've had access to for 2 years returned a permissions error. I checked 3 other files. Same error. I ran a search on the org chart draft in the shared drive." He paused. "My name has already been removed." He had been removed from the org chart before he was told he was being let go. That was what the 3 a.m. phone call was. That was why all the lights were on. "Okay," I said carefully. "What do you need from me?" He picked up one of the USB drives from the counter. "Everything I've built over the past 3 years is on Callaway servers. Every model, every framework, every client delivery architecture I developed. When I walked in the door, I brought one client relationship and a methodology. I have since built 7 more client relationships and refined that methodology to the point where the junior team runs it without me needing to supervise. And I need you to tell me." He stopped. "I need someone who still has full system access to tell me whether the clause in my employment contract about proprietary methodology actually covers what I think it covers. Because if it does, I can't take anything. And if it doesn't, I have until Friday." The room was very quiet. "You want me to access the contract repository," I said. "I want you to read 2 clauses," he said. "That's all. I want to stop here and be honest with you about what I was thinking in that moment. Because I have had a long time since to examine it, and I want to give it to you cleanly. I was thinking. He called me, and not someone else. Out of the 14 people not on the layoff list, he called me at 3 a.m. because he trusted me, and because I still had full access, and because he needed both of those things simultaneously. And I was thinking, there is a version of what he is asking that is completely reasonable. A person wanting to understand their own contract before they lose the leverage of being employed, and there is a version of it that is not. And I was sitting in his living room at 3 a.m. surrounded by open drawers and USB drives, and I could not yet tell which version this was. I said, "What's on the drives?" He looked at me steadily. "Personal documents, my performance reviews, my client correspondence from my personal email, my notes. Nothing from the system." I said, "Have you already taken anything from the system?" A pause. "No, that's why you're here." I said, "I need to see the contract first." He handed it to me. A physical copy, printed, already open to the right pages. Which meant he had been reading it for 4 hours. I read the 2 clauses. Then I read them again. The proprietary methodology clause at Callaway was, "I will tell you honestly," one of the broader ones I have read. It covered frameworks, models, client engagement architectures, training materials, and, this was the part that mattered, any derivative intellectual property developed during the term of employment using company resources. Daniel had developed his methodology at Callaway. On Callaway's time. On Callaway's servers. The clause was not ambiguous. I put the contract down. "You can't take the methodology," I said. "The clause covers it." He sat back. Something in his face moved, though not toward collapse, more like a person absorbing the confirmation of something they already suspected. "And the client relationships? The contract doesn't cover relationships. It covers materials. You can't take the pitch decks. You can take the relationships." He was quiet for a moment. That's something. It was something. It was also not what he had built 3 years to protect. I said, "Daniel, what are you actually planning to do?" He said, "I'm going to start my own firm." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that fills in around a thing that has been decided for a long time and is only now being said out loud. He told me what he had been considering for a year and a half. That Callaway's growth model had calcified. They were taking the same clients, running the same playbooks, billing at rates that no longer reflected the actual value of the work. That he had been watching the junior team, including me, develop capabilities that the firm was systematically undercharging and underpromoting. That he had a number in his head, a client volume, a staffing model, a service structure. and he had told himself he would act on it eventually. Calloway had moved the date for him. I said, "You said the order mattered. Why me? Why am I in this order?" He said, "Because I want to ask you to come with me. Not tonight. Not as a pressure. I want to tell you that I'm building something, that I think you're one of 6 people in that building whose name I'd want on it, and I want you to have time to think about it, without feeling the weight of this room in the middle of the night." He looked at the open drawers, the files on the table, the laptop and the 3 drives. "I'm sorry for the 3am call. I needed to know about the contract, and I needed someone I trusted, and He paused. "I should have waited until morning." I said, "You were alone in here with all the lights on." He said, "Yes." I said, "It's fine that you called." I drove home as the sky was beginning to lighten. I did not go back to sleep. I called in a half-day of PO, sat at my kitchen table with coffee I forgot to drink, and thought about the geometry of the choice in front of me with the specific intensity you bring to things that have a real deadline attached. Friday was 2 days away. The layoffs would be announced. Daniel would be gone. I would still be employed, still on the team, probably given a larger account load to compensate for the reduction in senior staff, which is what always happens. Which is one of the things that happens when you survive the cut and have no one left to complain to about it. Or I could resign before Friday and signal something different. I thought about what he'd said about the junior team, capabilities the firm is systematically undercharging and underpromoting. I had a performance review scheduled for next month, the 3rd one in 18 months, and I had been told in each of the first 2 that I was on track. A phrase that means something in year 1 and begins to mean less as the months accumulate and the track does not appear to be taking you anywhere specific. I opened my laptop and looked at my contract. The call came at 11:43 am. Not Daniel. Not anyone from Calloway. A number I recognized as belonging to Helen Marsh, the firm's managing director, Daniel's superior, the person who had, I now understood, signed off on removing his name from the org chart before telling him he was removed. I let it ring once. Picked up. She said, "Nadia, I wanted to reach out personally before the all-staff on Friday. You're one of our strongest junior consultants, and I want to make sure you're feeling supported during what's going to be a period of change." The call I had not been expecting. The framing I recognized instantly. She was calling the people who were staying. She was running a retention campaign in advance of a Friday announcement she wasn't telling anyone about yet. She was calling me personally to make sure I was feeling supported because she needed me to still be there on Monday, and she was going to lose people the moment Friday happened. I said, "I appreciate you reaching out, Helen. Can I ask what changes you're referring to?" A half-second pause. "Nothing definitive I can speak to yet. Just wanted to touch base." I said, "Of course. I'm glad to hear it." After I hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. She had not told me. She was managing the information, releasing it in controlled doses to the people she needed to manage, and she had called me as part of that management. I was a resource she was tending. I was not a person she was telling the truth to. Daniel had called me at 3 am. He had told me the order mattered, and then told me everything in the right order, including the part where he wasn't sure if what he was asking was fair to ask. I knew which call I trusted more. I did not resign before Friday. This is the part of the story where I want to be careful with you, because the version where I walk out dramatically on Wednesday makes a better shape than what I actually did. What I actually did was more boring and more deliberate. I stayed through Friday. I sat in the all-staff meeting and watched 14 people learn they were losing their jobs, including Daniel, who received the news in the same meeting as everyone else despite having known for 2.5 days. I watched Helen Marsh deliver it with the precise calibration of someone who had practiced, and I watched her look briefly, once, at the camera during the Zoom call, which is where I was, and say that the firm remained committed to its remaining team. I submitted my resignation the following Monday morning. 3 weeks' notice, as my contract required. I cited personal reasons, which is allowed, and which let me keep the reference I would need. I spent those 3 weeks documenting everything that was mine to take. My performance reviews, my client correspondence from my personal email, the frameworks I had built in my own time, on my own machine, for my own understanding. I was careful. Daniel had shown me what careful looked like. On my last day, Helen called me into her office and asked if there was anything the firm could do to retain me. She had a number ready. It was a good number. I said, "I've accepted another opportunity." She said, "Can I ask where?" I said, "I'm not able to share that yet." Voss Strategic Partners opened 11 months ago with 6 people. I am one of them. We have 4 clients, 3 of whom Daniel knew personally from his time at Callaway, and 1 of whom is a referral from the second. We are not large. We are not trying to be large yet. We are trying to be exactly as precise as the person who built the methodology we run on, which he developed over 3 years in someone else's building and then rebuilt from memory, because the contract said he had to. He is different as a founder than he was as a manager. More patient, somehow. More willing to explain the reasoning behind a decision, instead of just issuing the decision. Maybe because now the reasoning is entirely his, and he has nothing to protect by keeping it inside. He still manages through precision. He still remembers what you said. He is still not someone who calls at 3 a.m. without reason. He has called me at 3 a.m. twice since then. Once was a client emergency, a real one, the kind you handle at any hour. Once was something else. Something that happened slowly enough over 11 months of working very close to someone in a small firm that I almost didn't notice it was happening, and then couldn't explain why I hadn't noticed sooner. That is a different story. The shape of it belongs to a different night. What I will tell you is this: I have a read receipt on the messages we send now on an entirely different channel than anything with a contract attached. And I do not dread the checkmark. I have not dreaded it once. Have you ever gotten a call that changed the direction of everything and only understood later what it was really asking of you? Tell me in the comments. And if you found your way here, subscribe. The next story starts somewhere you won't see coming.